Adam Stockwell, Senior Vice President, Milwaukee Bucks. Thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Adam, what initially got you into the security industry, and what was your experience? What caused you to get into it?
Well, it was an interesting story. I came out of college, not really knowing what I wanted to do, so I went to graduate school, like any good student does. Got about halfway through graduate school, and I was home for Christmas break. Had a conversation with my mom out in the driveway, and she said, "What are you going to do with your life?" And I said, "I'm going to be a secret agent," as a joke. And she said, "Why don't you go look into that?" So I logged online and started looking up what careers in the area would be, and looked at the CIA and the Secret Service and other agencies, and the Secret Service kind of caught my attention and kind of started going through the process there. So,
how long did that take?
Well, that was interesting. So once I found the service, I put in my paperwork with them, did an initial interview. It's like a 9-phase process. Got to the 3rd phase, didn't get hired. They told me I was too young and didn't have enough experience. And no 22-year-old wants to hear that. So, but I had the bug at that point and kind of doubled down and tried to figure out how I was going to get my experience. I was either going to join the military or go into law enforcement. So I ended up joining the Raleigh Police Department, became a police officer, did that for a short period of time. And then the service got back in touch with me and said, "Hey, where are you?" And I'd let them know where I was and kind of pushed through the process at that point. So it was a nine months to a year hiring process once you get fully through the process. And that's what started it for me.
It's awesome. Division I college soccer, Raleigh PD, Secret Service, SVP of the Milwaukee Bucks. Kudos.
It's been a fun career.
And thanks for your service with the service. Speaking of the Secret Service, you're with them 16 years. Mm-hmm. We've just recently gone through an election. Former President Trump has been elected. 2 different assassination events. Mm-hmm. We haven't seen this in the U.S. for a long time. What's the impact on the service right now? And how in your eyes, are they coping with the challenges of President Trump?
Sure. It's easy to be a critic, right? So that said, they're going through the hardest time in recent history in the service. So I've got a lot of friends who are still there and who are working through this. I think they're having to take a real strong look at leadership, getting a focus back on what their primary mission is, which is protection of our elected officials, and balancing that against our investigative mission. So there's 2 sides of the service. There's a protective side and the investigative side. Where those priorities lie, where they should be. Should we be part of Department of Homeland Security? Should we be back in the Treasury Department or some other arrangement? The reality is they're still the best in the world at what they do, and that's something that you can't lose sight of. It's very easy to sit back and Monday morning quarterback what happened, what went wrong, and there's a lot of that to be done, a lot of reckoning to be had there. But at the end of the day, these guys and these men and women are the best at what they do. They give their lives, their careers, everything into executing that mission on a daily basis. And I think it's just time to reset, restack those priorities, and come up with what the game plan is going forward. Make sure we're resourced properly, both monetarily and from a personnel standpoint, and understand what that takes.
Those 2 incidents were front and center headlines. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's plenty that never get to the media.
Sure, there's all kinds of stuff that goes on behind closed doors, or threat issues that come up, or there's the lone actor, the individual who took the shot in Pennsylvania appears, I haven't gotten a full debrief on it yet, but a lone actor who might have had some mental health challenges, which is a classic thing that you deal with in the service, and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of those individuals that the service is aware of.
Yeah, it's a tough job. What lessons from your experience with the Secret Service have really applied towards your role now with the Milwaukee Bucks?
Just paying attention to detail. It's a saying we have in the service all the time: pay attention to detail. Have a plan. Be open to. You're not always right. I could go in and do a presidential advance and say, I want to set the stage this way, the motorcade that way, whatever it might be, and understanding that another agent might come in and have a perfectly good plan. It might be very different than what I come up with, and collaborating both internally and externally with your public safety partners, how to come up with that plan, and then translating that to the private industry has been interesting as well.
I imagine in Milwaukee that credibility, though, that you come to the table with as you're dealing with the agencies in Milwaukee lends a lot of support, and you get good collaboration with your local partners.
For sure. In the Secret Service, they always give credit and praise, and as they should. You can never do any one of these protective advances or protective missions without the support of the local state law enforcement, your public safety partners. And the same thing when we're executing that mission in Milwaukee. So one of the biggest lessons is, as an agent, you're a gun-carrying criminal investigator. An 1811 is your job description. 1811 gun-carrying criminal investigator. Some jokingly say all you are is an event planner that carries a gun, and that's kind of true. So understanding ingress, egress, crowd management, screening technologies, timelines, all those things. That was actually very transferable from the Secret Service into the private sector. And then bringing that formality with it, because a lot of people in private industry don't necessarily understand what real security is. They know they need someone or they need a company or whatever to run security, but what does that really mean and what are the credentials behind it? I think that gets lost in translation sometimes. So when you can come in with the background I had or any of my cohorts had, can bring that kind of knowledge and insight into the private industry, I think is really, really positive.
It's a great point, but there's plenty that tried to make the transition from an agency into the event security space, a stadium, team, whatever, and they haven't had the success you've had as far as pulling that off and getting a team that really works well for you like you've got in Milwaukee. Why have you been so successful at it when there's been some challenges at times?
I think a lot of it has to do with personality. The big thing, I think I said it before, seeing the Secret Service is that liaison skill, knowing how to speak with law enforcement. And then it's not about doing the job all the time. It's also about, going and getting that meal together and being the human and acknowledging that you might not know the best about a certain subject, right? Being able to leverage that local law enforcement partner or that local security partner. You and I've had these conversations before when we were working together, right? You came from the civilian side of the house. No law enforcement was in your background, but strong event security background. And, I can sit there and say, yeah, I know better because I was in federal law enforcement. I think the big thing there is being able to say, I don't know everything. Dan, what do you know? Right. And then I might bring a different perspective and you learn from each other on it and come up with a common ground. So I think that liaison skill and knowing just how to work with people, the soft skills are super important. The question about have people not transitioned well, I'm sure it's happened, and I would guess it might have to do with soft skills. So where do the soft skills meet the hard skills, and how do you bring that in a way that you can explain why you're trying to do what you need to accomplish in the civilian market and have it be more palatable?
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed that relationship when we were working on the arena, that you actually asked those questions, and so kudos. Let me shift to, if you think back to your toughest day, event-related, whether it's the Bucks or your previous life, what was it? What was the most challenging day you've had in the industry?
In the Bucks side of the house, we've had a couple. Probably the one that's most well-known was the 2021 championship run. When we won the championship there in Milwaukee, Game 6. We had several challenges leading up to that. The city had just never dealt with a crowd of that size in the downtown area, and we had redefined what downtown Milwaukee was with our 30 acres in the Deer District. That used to be a big gravel lot and a highway overpass. Right. So we had built this new 30-acre facility downtown, but had never really exercised it. And we were exercising it in real time at a very high level, worldwide event. So we had to learn in real time what works, what doesn't work. Hey, we planned for this, didn't go the way we thought it would. Where do we adjust? And after every game, we would make those adjustments through all 4 rounds. That came to a culmination on that last night that we won, which I think most people don't realize. We estimated 60 to 80,000 people in that very concentrated downtown area. There were kids climbing light poles and standing on top of our surveillance cameras and all kinds of things. We know that we had over 60 ambulance transports off the property that night that we know were related to our event. Everything was just overwhelmed. Yeah. And how do you survive that? We kind of held on for dear life and went, hey, let's get through this. So we did, but that was probably the single most challenging night of just managing what was going on.
Yeah, like knock on wood, you didn't have the scenario that took place a couple of years later.
A couple of years later, we had the Brooklyn series. We had a shooting just off campus, and that was getting within. Well, it got reported that there was a shooting in the Deer District during a game. It was actually not in the Deer District, off campus, but perception's reality. And we were just opening the building to dump after the game, and as those doors were opening, shots rang out a couple blocks away, and people started running back into the building, and it was a huge challenge for us.
It's a scenario we'll talk about tomorrow during the summit. It's something I've used with a lot of my clients, and that panic situation is tremendous. And I don't think we ever really understand as planners what happens when that panic's coming at you.
Sure.
What would you do differently that night?
Dude, I mean, don't let anybody shoot anybody, right? Like that's a big problem. That was a tough one though, because it was actually five independent shootings that took place over a 2-hour period.
Outside of your perimeter,
outside of our perimeter,
control.
outside of our control. So what would have I done to prepare differently? Probably not a lot. I mean, I think in hindsight, you'd like to say more tabletops, more preparation. The reality is we had a plan in place. And I think that's when we get into how do you make things work. We all can do physical security, event security. It's what do you do in those what if scenarios. Yeah. So every week when we start our departmental meeting at the building, you try to throw something in like, hey, here's a quick scenario, a 5-minute scenario. If this happens, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Kind of thing. Or you put together. There's plenty of examples in our industry on a weekly basis. I would say that say something just happened at XYZ arena, let's put it up on the screen and watch it, and hey, how would that affect us? Like, I think there was just a court intrusion post-game at the LA Clippers a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
And this guy walked on the court to one of the players and put his arm around him, gets a picture, and you're watching security. They know something's not right, but they're not acting, right? So like, I show that to my team security guys. Hey, what would we do in the same scenario? So I think, you talk about the scenario that happened in Milwaukee with people that you present in front of. Why not talk about it? Let's talk about what happened that night. We have a plan. I don't think you could ever exercise a plan enough. And so we try to do that as much as we possibly can. What would I change that night? I wouldn't change anything other than, gosh, could we have been more prepared? How do we handle that better? One of the biggest things we had is we have a crisis management team, and those that were on campus that night converged in the operations center in our conference room, and we started digesting the information of what's happening. Okay, communication is 90% of problems in business, right? Yep. Trying to understand in real time what had happened outside was almost impossible. Okay, right. We know in retrospect that there was a shooting outside, and there were 5 different shootings, and there were long rifles involved, and a number of people hit. There were over 30 police officers that responded almost immediately. They couldn't return fire, though, because they're in the middle of a crowd. Right. But the perpetrators were shooting indiscriminately. It's amazing more people weren't hit. But getting that information from the police department outside 3 blocks away in real time into the operations center was just super difficult. Yeah. And it's hard for people to understand that sometimes. So you have to be the voice of calm in that room. You tell everyone to take it down a notch and start digesting what's going on. Yeah. And if there's any way to simulate that kind of a response in a tabletop, which is very difficult to do, that's where you really the rubber meets the road. Yeah. You mentioned your toughest day in your current role. Mm-hmm. Do you want to touch on anything in your previous role? Previous roles, it was just examples, right? I was standing in front of the stage in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia when there was a hand grenade thrown. We didn't know it at the time because it didn't get reported by the local PD. The individual, and I forget his name. He's still alive today, but he had made a homemade hand grenade to throw onto the dais while we were standing there. And it was found when the crowd was leaving after the event. And the only reason it didn't go off is because there was a handkerchief tied tightly around it, so the spoon never came off the grenade. We found out about it an hour or two later as we're getting ready to board the plane to leave, and they were able to forensically go back and through imagery and figure out where the grenade was held, who had it, and then the locals understood who that guy was and went and found him and had a conversation with him. So that was a tough day. And those are the big details, the presidential details. A lot of people don't understand the Secret Service takes care of any head of state that comes into the United States. So It's when the UN happens in New York City and you have 150 heads of state and their spouses come into town, the Secret Service protects them as well. So you go from being a detail of hundreds, dozens, if not hundreds of people down to, we call it affectionately the dot formation, right? Where it's just you and the president of Namibia walking through downtown Manhattan and dealing with whatever those issues might be. So there's always little nuggets and stories that came up.
So lessons learned from either your Secret Service, tough day in Georgia, or, at the Bucks. What were the real lessons that you're able to take away and be able to work with your teams on?
You're never too old in the industry or too senior to learn something new and be open to learning from somebody. We've got I just changed my management team at my arena rather significantly this past year. And brought in a couple of senior guys to run things, and I brought a couple of junior guys in the industry with no law enforcement experience, just junior security folks. And honestly, the young guys, like they're full of energy and they want to get after it. And like, you look at that and go, there's value in this.
Right.
Not being, we get stuck sometimes and I want this kind of a person or that kind of person. I hired this young guy and he's just fantastic. And,
right.
We can all learn from that energy and the motivation. And he worked for a couple of years in the industry and that's it. But he's already able to bring in, well, I learned this at my old arena and we did it this way. And I'm like, tell me more about that. Give me a proposal on how we would change this here.
Right.
So never be closed off to new information or trying new things. And the other thing, and we'll talk about it later at some point this week, I'm sure, I think we get really focused when we're designing a program or a building or whatever it is on what technologies are going in there. The more important question is, and technology is super important. The bigger issue for me is how does the human interact with this? How does my day-to-day operator, my $20 an hour operator or guard function in this environment? How do we make it work for them?
Yeah.
And being more in tune with that and how we make that work. Because we can put all the AI and tech and mechanical dogs and whatever else in play or drones and whatever it comes down to the person that's running it on a day-to-day basis and how do they interact with it.
Yeah, and you and I both discussed. We put all this technology in these arenas and stadiums' hands, and we're using 10% of it, mm-hmm. right? There's more there than we're utilizing, and yep. I think that's the challenge, right? Is how do we really find that staff that can utilize the capabilities of that technology to make every job easier,
yep.
right, and mitigate the challenges that are in place.
The other thing that's important too is the amount of technology that's out there that isn't necessarily what it's marketed to be.
Well,
and that's something that I've learned. I had to learn it. I leaned on you for like, hey, the tech in the industry, what do I need to pay attention to? I knew operationally how to do things in that, but what tech works? And I'll never forget, we'd go to a conference or a floor show or whatever, and there could be 100 widgets, 100 companies that make this widget. Only these 3 are worth talking to,
right? Because
the other 97 won't be here next year. They're going to sell out and go somewhere else. So I'm healthily skeptical anytime I get a call from anybody. And one of the first questions I will ever ask is, where is it deployed in another professional sports arena?
Right. The NBA has a unique challenge. Mm-hmm. Your fans are right next to your number one asset.
Yep.
What do you see as the future of trying to overcome that challenge, mitigate that risk? Because the NBA is different than everybody else.
Yeah, so it's a great point. The NHL, you have a big pane of glass there. The NFL, a pretty good barrier from the stands down into the floor. Or into the field, but basketball is wide open. And how do you handle that? So you really want to pay attention to knowing who those people on the front rows are. As facial recognition technology improves and ticketing interfaces with facial rec, interfaces with these now frictionless technologies. How do we get those up to the standards to where we feel like they're screening at a level that is acceptable for mitigating that risk that's so close to our players?
Yeah. If there's one thing looking forward now, we're in 2024. You're in the middle of a season. What's in the future? What's on the horizon? What do you see the biggest challenge to our industry coming up in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think I'll stick in the tech world. AI is up and coming. How do we leverage AI to help buy down the information overload in these operation centers? There's some new and neat technology out there that kind of. I have 800 or 900 camera feeds that run into my operations center, and I've got a couple people in there on a 24-hour basis. They cannot ingest all that information. Forensically, it's great to go back and find out, hey, what happened? But how do we get to be more proactive with those video feeds and audio feeds that we have, and getting the technology to help us with that? I think that's where the AI in particular, is very interesting in helping us in that space. And then going back to what I said before, how do we help that operator understand what's going on in their environment and leveraging the tech in a real way that can help them, not the snake oil, the COVID sensing thermal cameras and all this kind of stuff. What really works? What does what it says it's going to do? Does this technology screen for what it says it'll screen for, or is it all, not necessarily what it's chalked up to be?
Do you see the risk changing?
For sure. My biggest fear, people ask me, what are you worried about? I'm worried about a big bang or boom out on the plaza. I feel really good inside our building. Defending 4 walls is much easier than defending an open space. and because there's no defined way how to guard that space. Having qualified guard personnel that can man those spaces, mitigate against open air threats, liaising with your local police departments for that counter sniper coverage or whatever you might need. Hey, is there a drone threat here? How do you mitigate against that? How do you involve drone or anti-drone technologies? I think is the threat going to increase? Yes. I think the world we've seen, as you said, you talked about President Trump earlier. The world has become smaller with the amount of technology and information flow,
yep.
and the threats have increased because of that. And how do you? Nothing would, in professional sports in particular, where we operate, nothing would be a bigger target than something that has a worldwide audience at 8 o'clock at night, right? So, and our adversaries know that,
right.
And what better way to make a statement? So it'll only increase.
You touched on AI. Is the bad guy going to use AI against us?
Oh, I think they probably already are. If they're not already, it would be foolish to think that.
Have we seen it yet in our environment?
I have not personally, but I mean, I'm just starting to dig into what AI actually is. Someone was on ChatGPT. My head of performance, who's an amazing, literally is a rocket scientist for the Milwaukee Bucks. His name's Troy Flanagan, one of the smartest people you'll ever meet. But he was showing me how, do you need to write a paper on anything? I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to do this, that, and the other. He goes, give me the information. And he took what I had written and put it into this Chat GPT or whatever it is, and it wrote the most beautiful paper. I was like, that's exactly what I was trying to say, which is kind of scary, right? Like it's neat stuff, but also kind of scary to think that if someone wanted to leverage that kind of technology against us, like, in ways that I don't want to say out loud,
right?
But like, hey, here's my security plan, find holes in it, and in a nanosecond it tells me here's where you're vulnerable. Well, don't think the bad guy doesn't have access to that same information.
Yeah, exactly. Anything else you want to share with our listeners?
No, I was just excited to be here for this the forum this week, and always fun to talk to you and the guys in the industry and trade information and see who's what's going on, what the next trends are, and try to stay ahead of it.
Well, I appreciate you taking your time out of your busy schedule. I'm hoping the team. I haven't looked lately, but I understand it wasn't a great start. So hopefully they come back stronger.
Yeah, I think we're 9-8 now. So we're third or fourth in the East. So it's been a good couple of weeks.
Kudos.
So
well, thank you very much for being here.
All right, brother. Sounds good.